All right, welcome back. I think we're all back now. Fantastic. Hopefully you've had a chance to meet a couple of other people, find out what kind of work they're doing, why they're interested in this futures thinking skill set, and some of the key lessons they think their organization needs to learn from the last year. We're not going to share back any of those yet. We're going to jump straight into talking a bit about what do we mean by this idea of futures thinking, and you'll have a chance to share some of your thoughts with each other as we go through the rest of the workshop. But I'm going to share my screen with you again. If I can find where my PowerPoint is, fantastic. I should also mention as well that we're recording this session so that we can put it up afterwards. So just so everyone knows, and if you're not comfortable having your video and recording, just make sure you haven't got your face on. All right. So what are we talking about when we're talking about futures thinking? There's a couple of things that we like to say that what we're not talking about when we mean futures thinking first. So the first thing is that it's not necessarily about predicting the future. It's not about making a bet and saying, this is exactly what's going to be happening 5 years, 10 years down the track from now. Because we're living in such an uncertain world, a lot of people use that acronym of VUCA, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Because that's the kind of world we're living in, we can't make sort of concrete predictions about exactly what's going to be happening down the track and rely on those being true and sort of make our plans based on those predictions, because it's a recipe for failure and for setting up for the wrong kinds of things. What we can do though, and what futures thinking is really about, is paying attention to what's happening now, paying attention to what's happened in the past, and seeing what kinds of trajectories we can find in those trends, and seeing what that means about what are some of the possible futures that could be approaching for us. So it's futures thinking with a plural in there. There's the S in there for plural futures. And that's really important. It's about thinking about what are the multiple different futures that could be ahead of us, and how can we try and prepare and be ready for a lot of those different futures, depending on which ones are most likely and which ones might have the biggest impact on us as well. So to give you a little overview of what that process looks like, the futures thinking approach involves 3 sort of key steps. So firstly, you're identifying those key forces or trends that are impacting the future. And we'll talk lots today about how we can actually identify some of those trends. Then you're sort of crafting multiple scenarios to capture those plural different futures that could be ahead of us. And then making choices to work out how we can adapt to and prepare for, and ideally actually actively shape those futures as we head into them. So it's not just a passive process of how can we understand what's going to be coming and then make sure that we're ready for it when it comes. It's also a bit of an active process where we can try and work out what are the possible futures, what are the possible paths that we could take, and how can we try and nudge our organization, our community, our ecosystem in the right direction? How can we make sure that we're trying to follow this most desirable path and achieve that most desirable future together? So to give you a bit of an example of what this looks like as a process, I'm going to talk you through a bit of the process that we went through at Skills of the Modern Age to create our Future of Work report that we've created across the last year with input from an awesome co-design team of Future of Work thought leaders in WA. We brought them together to help us think about what might be some of these key trends, what might be some of these scenarios that are possible for the future of work in WA across the next 10 years. And it also incorporates some of the data from our Future of Work index tool as well. So incorporating lots of that stuff to work out what might some of these possible futures look like. So when we brought together this co-design team, these were some of the key trends that they came up with. And this is just one segment out of a 4-segment sort of photo. So there were heaps and heaps of different trends that they identified were going to be really important for the future of work. If you squint and try and read people's handwriting, you can see some of the key trends that they identified there. You'll see there's lots about climate change and ecosystems. There's stuff about automation and how that's going to affect our work. There's stuff about health services and digital democracy and all kinds of different trends that we've seen across the last year with COVID-19, with climate change, with all sorts of different influences on our local systems and global systems as well. Once we've identified a whole bunch of trends, then the process is about prioritizing those trends, working out which ones might be most important, and then trying to identify 2 key critical uncertainties. So these critical uncertainties are trends which could go one of 2 ways, if you like. They've got 2 poles to them. And the critical uncertainties that we identified in our process for this report were the uncertainty of a global economy versus isolation. So as we were going into this time of greater and greater uncertainty, of lots of global disruption, were we going to see a global economy with lots of collaboration across borders, or were countries and organizations going to sort of shut down, put their walls up and say, we're just going to deal with our own little patch here. We're going to protect ourselves, protect our own, but you guys over there can do whatever you want to do. So that's sort of 2 poles of, are we going to have greater collaboration or greater isolation? And then the second one was looking at how the world of work was going to shift. So were we going to have this shift into a world where people have to live to work, where the amount of work available is really limited, people are in high competition for that work, that automation has a really negative effect on economies, there's greater uncertainty and sort of less job security, and everyone's sort of scrambling to find enough to sort of make ends meet? Or were we going to transition into this work to thrive world where the amount of work that you do is sort of decoupled from your ability to provide for yourself and for your family and loved ones, where people are actually able to choose work that is aligned with their passions, choose work that is making the world a better place, and not be working just because they need to make ends meet. So those were sort of the 2 critical uncertainties that we identified. And then the last part of the process is to work out, all right, if those are our 2 critical uncertainties, what if we put those on a 2x2 matrix? What would that mean about the kinds of worlds that might arise when those different critical uncertainties intersect? So this is the sort of key image from our report that captures those 4 scenarios that emerge. And I won't take you through them all because we'll be sending out some follow-up documents where you can check out our Future of Work report. And we've got an event coming up where we're going to be talking about this in detail as well. But you can see there, if we're going to have a global economy and also that work to thrive world, then what does that world look like? Maybe that's something where work really works for everyone, and globally we have these systems where work is working. Or on the opposite side, if we have this live to work sort of struggle world plus isolationism, then we're going to end up with this survival tribalism world where everyone's sort of shut down in their own little enclaves, struggling to make ends meet individually without any collaboration. So working out what does that mean for all of the different kinds of sectors within society, and trying to sort of flesh out those scenarios into these stories of what the world could be. Again, that idea of plural futures that could be ahead of us. So those are those 3 sort of key parts of the futures thinking process: identifying key trends and forces, crafting those multiple scenarios, and then the part that our report didn't capture, which was, all right, how are we now going to make choices and adapt to and prepare for and try and shape those futures that are ahead of us? And there's a little bit there about provocations for future builders in the report, about what are some of the key questions that people need to think about as they start to make those choices. What we're going to focus on today, because we've just got an hour together online, it's a fast-paced, collaborative, interactive session, we're just going to focus on that first part of the process for today. So how do we identify some of the most important trends and forces that are shaping the future? But what we'll do is we'll encourage you at the end of the session, if you're really interested in this stuff, if you want to go away and do some more thinking, we'd really encourage you to go away and work out what might some of the critical uncertainties be, and what does that mean about the kinds of scenarios that could arise based on the work that I've done in this session. And we'd love to see what you come up with as well. So I'm going to pass you over to Michelle now, and she's going to introduce you to a pestle analysis, which is a great way to start identifying those trends that are going to be super important. So Michelle, I will leave everyone in your capable hands.
Thanks, Matt, and love working from home. The garbage truck is just going past, so give it a minute. But yeah, oh, and someone's at the door. This is awesome. Perfect for your recording.
Do you need to grab that, or are you okay?
1 second. No, it's all good. This is great, live. So yeah, pestle analysis. It's a great little framework a tool that's basically, like Matt said, used to analyze and monitor, the macro environmental, external environment factors that can possibly or potentially have an impact of your organization. So we break it up into trends and these themes. So we've got political developments and economic trends, social, technological, legal, or environmental changes. And I think what's great about this framework is that you might already go naturally to a section of this where you're really a technological person and you know all about what Elon's doing, and you might have all the understanding of what's happening in that world, but you come to legal or you come to social and you're a little bit foggy. And this is why it's so important to sort of make sure you've got the full landscape and you can understand. If you don't have any information on part of this analysis, that usually means that you need to either find some more somebody else in your team or from the company that understands this and get them involved to get that diversity of thought into your analysis, or you might need to do some research yourself. So rather than just going down one rabbit hole, it really broadens out to all the different landscapes. So are we off to have a go at this now, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to be doing now is, in your groups that you've already met and said hello to, we're going to be sending you out into a mural board, into a breakout room again, and you'll have a mural board per breakout room for you to start identifying some of these trends. So I'll super quickly show you what your mural board is going to look like in case you didn't have a chance to check out the tutorial ahead of time. You'll get sent to a link. This is what a mural board looks like. And what we'll encourage you to do is, you don't need to even enter a name or anything like that. It'll invite you to. If you just hit the button that says enter as a guest, then you don't need to do any of that stuff. You'll come in, you'll see a mural board that looks like this. You can see the pestle across the top here. This is the activity that we're going to be focusing on first, and we'll explain what this 2x2 matrix is later. So as a group, you're going to start identifying what are some of the key trends that we've seen over the last 12 months that are really going to impact what the future looks like across the next 10 years. So under all of those different categories, as Michelle just explained to you, all you need to do is jump in, click on a post-it note and start typing. So legal change, even though that's in the wrong category, whatever you need to type in there, just click on that and type it. And if you need to create a new one, go off to the side, double click, and it will create you a brand new one as well. And you can resize and type in that one too. So if you run out of space because you've got so many ideas, that's all you need to do. All right, any questions about how mural boards work or about how the activity is going to work before I send you into the breakout rooms? What I do need to do is actually give you the links to your breakout rooms. That'd be helpful. So
I have a question.
Oh yeah, go for it.
So what we're gonna write, those are the projections, right? So for example, for the political one, do we write what's happening now politically or what we think will happen in the future?
Great question. It can be a little bit of both. So I think what you're looking for is the trends that you're seeing. So those should be based in stuff that you're seeing now. We don't want to be, obviously you wouldn't be making wild predictions about what might happen in the future if it's not based in trends that are happening now. But it can be something that you're sort of saying, well, what we're seeing now is this. And so what I think that means going forward is we're going to see increasing whatever it might be. So yeah, it can be a little bit of both. Does that help?
Yeah.
All right, folks. Now, when I sent everyone out into breakout rooms, could you guys see what the number of your breakout room was? Did you see if you're in group 1 or group 2, things like that? I'm getting some nods and some shake of the head. What I'll do is just make sure that everyone knows what breakout room they're in so they know which link to head into. I'm just going to quickly move somebody around because they need to be in the same one as their iPhone, which makes sense. All right, so Amandine, you're in room 1, so let your whole group know that you're in room 1. Chris Tan, you're in room 2, so let your team know. Renee, you're in room 3. And David Barros, you're in room 4. Haley Meyer, you're in room 5. So let your team know once you head in, and then they'll know which link to click on. Does that make sense to everyone? Awesome. All right. So you're going to have a good sort of 9 or 10 minutes to work on this one, identifying as many trends as you can. Try and fill up as many of those post-it notes across the top of the screen as possible. And then we'll bring you back together and we'll work out what are we going to do with all these trends now that we've identified them. All right. If you've got any questions, then jump back in. Let me know.
Thanks for the guidance.
All right. Welcome back, team. I apologize to those groups who I may have scared with the giant post-it of Matt coming down and telling them how to do the exercise.
That was fun.
We've got a whole other section where you'll have time to think about how to prioritize some of those trends that Michelle's going to introduce you to now. So don't jump ahead too far or you won't have enough to do. But no, awesome work for those of you who are already feeling that they're ready for that next step as well. Let me share my screen again. And Michelle, I'll hand over to you to talk a bit about how we can start to prioritize these trends now.
Yeah, so my team 4 was actually one of the naughty teams that started to just crack straight into prioritizing. They've done a little bit of this before, but as we saw, it's actually, and if you're doing this in real time with your teams, having them remain up in the columns is really great to start with. Then, as I said to my team, you can start to see where your gaps are. So instead of just pulling them straight down, then you may miss that you've got these big gaps under the economic section. So if you're able to try and fill up that wall and find people to come in and fill it up, that's probably best. And then when you can't think of any more possibilities, come into this prioritization matrix. And I bloody love a good prioritization matrix. So this one we're using here is, like Matt said, it's underneath. Half the people have already seen it. Aside the rain, I'm having a great day here. So we're going to start pulling them down into, so on the left, you can see if the clarity of the impact, what is the clarity that we understand about this impact of this trend? If that's high or low, how clear is it that it's going to come about? And along the bottom, is it likely that the size of this impact, what is the likelihood of the size of this trend? So if it's lower or higher. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but if there's any questions before we jump in, and the reason we do this basically is just to understand where do we focus our next steps and where will we start building strategies rather than having a big overwhelming amount of things up on a wall. We can now really drill down into, well, these are the key points like you guys did with your report.
Yeah, fantastic. And what I'll do is just clarify and give one example before I send everyone back out. When we're talking about clarity about the impacts of a trend, we've sort of said clarity about the impacts deliberately as opposed to just clarity about the trend. So for example, something like COVID-19, we might have a high level of clarity that it's going to have a big impact and that it's going to be a big part of our lives for the next, year at least. But our clarity about the impacts of the trend might be quite low. So it might be that we're very sure that something is going to come about, but we actually have very little clarity about what it's going to mean, how it's going to impact our local ecosystems, our global ecosystems, our economies, all the rest of it. So think about, how much clarity do we have? Not just that it's going to be a thing, but about what actual impact is it going to have on us and on different ecosystems. Is that making sense? Awesome. As Michelle said, a lot of you already know what to do and have already jumped in and started doing this part, but we'll throw you back into your breakout rooms. You'll have another bit of time to start now pulling those same trends that you've identified down onto the matrix and start prioritizing them based on the impact and clarity. So I'll open up these rooms again for you. Where's everyone? There you all are. Good. When you take ages to come back, I know that you're engaged in the activity. I was just having a little laugh to myself. Someone had in the high clarity, high impact category, I think they had FX fluctuation, but I could have sworn I read flux capacitation. I was like, oh no, someone hasn't understood the activity correctly. It's real world trends. But no, awesome to see all of those being pulled down onto the matrix and people starting to understand, all right, where do some of these sit and what might be the most important trends to start to look for. The other thing to note here is that as with most matrices, as you're pulling it down onto a matrix like this, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have one thing that's in the far top right hand corner and that means that that's an easy choice as the most important thing. More or less clarity doesn't necessarily mean more or less importance to focus on as an organization. So what you might need to then think about if you're doing this piece of work within your organization and sort of plotting out what the futures might look like for you is thinking about, all right, what are the sort of the wild cards that we have low certainty about, but they would have a big impact. And so we probably need to have a sort of a plan for those, but also what are some of the big sort of common certain trends. And what are some of the stuff that's just low-hanging fruit as well, that's going to have a relatively low impact, but we're super certain about it, so we should still keep preparing for that. That should just be part of our business as usual as well. So thinking about what do those different categories mean for the kinds of ways that you need to adapt and prepare for the future. All right, Michelle, I'll throw back to you for our last little piece of the activity, last piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. That was fun, guys. So yeah, now we're going to look back to our matrix and choose. We're really going to select one key trend and we're going to formulate a piece of advice for a modern organization about how to adapt to it. So discuss it with your team and write it down. But yeah, it's great when you have that better understanding of your position and you have some advice that you can offer, then you can look towards other strategies of how to keep moving towards that. So is everyone clear about what we're doing? Selecting a trend, formulating a piece of advice, discussing it with your team?
All good, ready to go. All right, so if you had to boil it all down to one piece of advice, what would you give? And I'm just going to give you 3 minutes on this one, so super quick. We'll see you again soon. All right, welcome back for the last time. Hopefully we've got some awesome advice for modern organizations. 3 minutes is super quick. Apologize for that one. We've got a bit of time for a couple of groups to share their advice. I know. It's a fast-paced learning environment. We've got to see if we can get through as much as we can in the space of only an hour together. But we've got time for a couple of groups to share their top piece of advice for today's organizations about how to adapt to some of these really important trends. So did anyone want to be very brave and volunteer? What was the sort of top piece of advice that your group came up with? Lauren, was that a hand up? Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, we kind of ran out of time formulating our advice, but the trend that we were talking about is the relationship between data privacy, big tech regulation, and social media algorithms, and how a lot of organizations might actually be exposed to any changes in those factors, which may influence how they reach customers, the types of communities their customers and people are a part of, all of that kind of thing. And our piece of advice was for organizations to just do a bit of an assessment as to how they touch on the algorithm. So Are they heavily reliant on social media advertising would be kind of an obvious example, but then there might be less obvious outcomes to think about as well.
Yeah, right. It's a bit of an algorithm audit for your organization. Fantastic. Did anyone else want to jump in and share?
I can share what we discussed in our group. We highlighted the increase in new technology. That was a strong trend. So whether it was AI or whether it was the new tools that we're using like Zoom and Mural and virtual collaboration, online facilitation, online learning, we sort of put that all together as one theme. And our advice was to upskill, upskill, upskill. So, you know, whether it's an individual or an organisation, it was critical to learn new technology to increase the capability of the individual and the business.
Yeah, fantastic. That's awesome advice. All organisations need to be constantly learning and upskilling their people. And yeah, you guys all know that, given that you're jumping on this call today. Anyone want to jump in as our last bit of advice that they wanted to share before we wrap up for today?
I'll drop in team 4 quickly to talk about, it's the one of the guys want to talk about our advice.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
You
go
go,
on,
Jared.
David. Yeah, no, go on, David. You explain
yeah,
how this is going to play out.
Kind of lightheartedly, we had GME to the moon. But I think if I was to try and get the underlying thread to that thought, it was in the lower right-hand quadrant. So high impact, low certainty. The economic theme, I think, was around like erosion of trust in institutions and potential for stagnation in economic growth and high amounts of inflation. And I think the GME thing has been like that hallmark moment where it's pointing to, I guess, the underlying current of the culture and society, breaking down those financial institutions. So to summarize that in one piece of advice, use decentralized finance systems. It's the best I got.
Awesome, thank you. So thank you all so much for participating in this one. As you've all pointed out, it's been a very fast-paced introduction to futures thinking. There's a whole lot more to it. And if you feel like this is something that could be really valuable for your organization, something that would be really valuable for you to sit down and do with your team and look at what are the big trends coming towards us over the next 5 to 10 years and how can we start to be prepared for them in different ways. I'll quickly share with you some of the stuff that we've got coming up. But I want to take a chance first to say a huge thank you to Michelle Bell for joining us and for co-facilitating this session with us. So if you know how, join me in giving her a little digital round of applause for her awesome work. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Awesome to have you working with us. So super quickly, Skills of the Modern Age has got a brand new website that's looking very sexy. So jump on there and have a look, and that's got all of our programs and stuff that's coming up. So you can check all of that out. We've got a 3-hour bootcamp on futures thinking for innovators. So if you're really keen to learn more about this skill set and to actually expand it out, work out how you can start to pull out those critical uncertainties and map out the scenarios. If you feel like this wasn't quite enough for you, we'd love to see you at that one. And there's a discount that I'll send you out in the email that's coming very soon. If you want to hear more about our reports, we've got an event that's coming up, hopefully in person, on Wednesday, the 10th of March, all being well in WA, but otherwise we might shift it online. Either way, we'll be chatting to some people about the future of work and what it looks like and sharing more insights from our report. And we've also got 2 more free skill gyms coming up, which will be launched today. So how to read and lead the room on facilitation skills, and then challenging your design assumptions, which is all about that sort of early stage of the design process. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been awesome to work with you. It's been a fantastic start to the Skill Gyms for 2021, and we're looking forward to lots more of them. Thanks so much for joining us, team, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thanks, see you guys.
Thank you.